In March of 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved. The fall was mainly due to Gorbachev's radical reforms in his 6 years as a Union leader. As his views on how their economy should change from communist to open market, this change, along with trying to keep up with American military advancements, crippled the economy and the Soviets were nearly bankrupted. Keeping up with Reagan's huge defense budget was no longer an option. With Reagan's idea for the Star Wars, America's dominance was clear. The Cold War had unofficially ended. Once the Cold War officially came to a close after the collapse of the Soviet Union, President Clinton had decided to downsize the military. Funding was slashed by 17.1 billion, seeing that the government felt there was no longer a need for a large military, as most American troops were involved with humanitarian acts in countries such as Somalia, Haiti, and Kuwait. The budget slash saw less troops in the reserves, and the base closure commissions recommended the shuttering of 79 more military bases. Shortly after Clinton's budget cuts, American involvement in the Gulf War rose, and the government was forced to send a dwindling military into combat. How did the downsizing affect the Navy?
See, when I went into the Navy under President Ronald Reagan, all the talk was about building up to a 600 ship Navy, which was bigger than it had been since World War II. But then within just a matter of a couple of years, you had the Berlin Wall came down, and then the Soviet Union collapsed, and again, in a very quick period of time, we went from sort of hunting Russians and preparing for a war with Russia to sort of abandoning any idea of a big navy and just having a very small navy. Lots of people were cut from the military, paid to leave. It really, in a very short period of time, kind of gutted at least the Navy and probably to the same extent the other branches of the military.
So, how did this gutting of the military affect your role with the Gulf War along with others that you served with?
See, right when the Gulf War started, I was supposed to rotate from sea duty to shore duty. So I already had orders to go to a nice, cushy shore duty job to recruit people for the Navy. And just before I was getting ready to leave, I got orders to go to another ship that was heading to the Persian Gulf because at that time I was on a ship that specialized in landing Marines, and everybody expected that this would be a big, assault like D-Day with ships landing Marines sort of in Kuwait and Iraq. And due to the downsizing, there weren't a lot of officers with experience in that, so they were going to pull me off of my nice cushy shore duty job to send me over to Iraq, but because your oldest sister had just been born, I got out of that. But then my recruiting job changed from recruiting regular warfare officers to recruiting nurses because medical people were in short demand and we were still trying to get rid of the sort of war fighting officers.
So, would you say the downsizing of the military had a negative effect on your naval career?
Yes. Because at that point the writing was on the wall, so you knew there was not going to be a lot of opportunities for officers. As you get promoted, they're going to need sort of fewer senior officers, so it was kind of eliminated a lot of the career opportunities. So that's when I decided to get out of the Navy and go to law school. And while I was in law school, now under President Clinton, I was still in the reserves, but they, in an effort to sort of reduce the number of people in the military even further, they stopped paying us, so I stopped going. And that was the end of my military career.
Though cutting the defense budget and lessening the American military's presence on the world stage seemed like a good idea after the Cold War, it led to a military that required all hands on deck in the Gulf. The effects of the budget cuts were almost non-existent the next year, as the U.S. spent $61 billion on the Gulf War. From a soldier's standpoint, the downsizing was the beginning of the end, with reserve members being paid to leave and jobs becoming hard to find, and those that were undesirable. The budget cuts overall led to low morale and unpreparedness for the war in the Gulf.